At about 1 a.m. on June 14, 2014, residents of Luhansk heard an explosion of great strength and a flash lit up half the sky. In the morning, there was an abnormally heavy downpour in Kiev. Surprisingly, it was raining in the morning every time after heavy losses in the ATO zone, after ambushes and shelling. Despite the hot summer, nature itself mourned the dead. This is the 9th series of the film about the ATO history of the war. We are trying to get to the bottom of the anti-terrorist operation in the east of Ukraine, the reasons for it and its results. What does the Russian Federation have to do with all this? How does the conflict between Ukraine and Russia pose a potential threat to Europe in general? War is the extension of politics. It is only logical that weapons should be used only as a last resort when all other means of resolving a conflict have been exhausted. However, if the backstreet villain wants to take away your life, there is no other way to survive, save for giving him the opposite and equal rebuff. As the saying goes, guns don't kill, people do. However, if you are armed, even an experienced robber in the dark backstreet hesitates before the attack and thinks carefully. Knowing that there will be an adequate rebuff, not being 100% sure of success, neither a street criminal nor an aggressor state will go into action. So the very presence of troops in positions is already important. Throughout the spring of 2014, Russian regular troops ready to strike maneuvered in dangerous proximity to the state border of Ukraine. This fact forced the Ukrainian command to split up forces in several directions. In addition to missions in the ATO zone itself, the army hostilely reinforced the entire border with the Russian Federation and Transnistria. It should be remembered that the Russian military forces, formerly called the 14th Army, is still deployed in this unrecognized republic. The Ukrainian army was in the process of mobilization and recovery. Overextension was catastrophic. In the face of the hybrid armed intervention in the spring of 2014, the state of Ukraine had only two options: to surrender and eventually die, dissolving a new version of the Soviet Union, or to fight for survival. As it was mentioned earlier, without border control, any fight against pro-Russian terrorists in the east of Ukraine is a waste of human lives and resources. Processing much greater stockpiles of armaments, Russia made up for the casualties and operational losses of militants without problems. The issue of border control was the key. As early as the end of May 2014, units of the National Guard and the Ukrainian armed forces began to concentrate in the outskirts of Luhansk. The strategic plan involved restoring of control over the state border. The way to solve this problem was the accumulation of troops at the Luhansk airport and then a push towards those units of the Ukrainian armed forces that were moving along the border from the south. But there simply weren't enough forces in order to clear and, most importantly, maintain the land corridor to the airport. That is why it was decided to use transport aircraft to reinforce the horizon of the Lugansk airport. While the army was busy surrounding Luhansk and preparing an operation to liberate Lysychansk, the airmen were engaged in delivery of human resources, ammunition, and equipment. They made 27 successful flights. In the early hours of June 14th, the Il-76 aircraft carried 3 landing vehicles, ammunition, food, and 40 soldiers on board, headed for the next flight. The first one made a successful landing, despite the fact that by that time the airport was already without power and the navigation equipment did not work. The second craft came in for a landing. Let us step back here and mention one important point. Hybrid war blurs the boundaries between military and civilians, politics and economy, blending everything together, breaking all rules and principles. In a real combat situation, for example, in the same Afghanistan, before receiving aircraft, their approach area should be cleared. For example, properly soften up with multiple launch rocket systems, wooded areas and other places where the enemy could theoretically hide. After that, mop up the territory with helicopters. This is the standard security protocol prescribed in the statute. But the territory of the Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast is densely populated, and any route clearing with Grad missiles was out of the question. Unlike the army of the Russian Federation, which literally razed the city of Grozny in 1995, the Ukrainian army was always sought to minimize civilian casualties. This usually leads to increased risks of the soldiers. At 0 hours 15 minutes, the engine of the second plane was hit by a missile fired from a man-portable air defense system. Il-76 is a large and sturdy aircraft. In the same Afghanistan, similar vehicles made successful landings with more serious damage. But using a quick-fire AA gun Zu-23, the terrorists finished off the aircraft, literally sawing it into pieces up in the air. At 0:51 Kiev time, the plane exploded in the air. Its wreckage fell 2 kilometers from the runway of the Luhansk airport. The third plane was immediately ordered to return to the base. In the morning, a group of paratroopers from among the defenders of the airport advanced to the crash site. They took the bodies of the dead and destroyed the remains of the cargo so that it would not be left for the enemy. Somewhat later, the militants came to the scene as well, but they did not find any bodies or trophies of war. Subsequently, commenting on what is happening, the leader of the terrorists, Bolotov, announced a shootout between the paratroopers, during which soldiers who wanted to side with the militants were allegedly killed. It was made to look as if the plane was heading to the airport to evacuate the bodies of the paratroopers who died in the shootout. However, even the Russian media was unwilling to unfold it. The next day, there was violent civil unrest in Kiev, near the embassy of the Russian Federation. People who were disgruntled by the annexation of Crimea and by Russia's open support for the terrorists in the Donbass bespotted the embassy building with bottles of paint and rotten eggs. Someone even tried to get into the territory of the embassy and take down the Russian flag. Breaking into the embassy territory was equated with the violation of the state border and could easily be used by the leadership of Russia as a pretext for boots on the ground. But Andrei Deshitsa, the acting foreign minister of Ukraine, arrived to the location in time and found the right words to appease the indignant crowd. In the meantime, fighting continued in the ATO zone. During June 14th, anti-terrorist operation forces liberated 10 small settlements. They managed to take control of 248 kilometers of the state border. On the same day, in Mariupol, militants fired at the convoy of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. 5 Ukrainian border guards were killed, and 7 more military servicemen were injured. On June 15th, the Ukrainian military liberated the city of Shasta. The 24th Territorial Defense Battalion, IDA, particularly distinguished itself in action. Russian journalist Igor Korneluk immediately accused battalion fighters of all mortal sins, attributing various war crimes to them. There was a reason for this attention. The unit, manned on a volunteer basis, had a high motivation and acted very boldly and effectively. Russian propagandists worked directly from the combat formations of the militants, staying in the country often illegally. Unlike their Ukrainian counterparts, they produced reports directly from the thick of events. Real explosions, real blood, and live commentary of the combatants. All this allows you to create an effect of presence and attract viewers, giving them a revised false version of the events. However, the proximity to the front line also has certain drawbacks. On June 17th, serious fighting broke out over the village of Metalist in the suburbs of Luhansk. The Ukrainian army began a planned encirclement of the city with the aim of forcing the militants to abandon it. During the shooting of the next report at the checkpoint of the terrorists, the journalist of the Russian Vesti News, Korneluk, came under mortar fire and later died in the hospital. It is noteworthy that in the last report of the Russian propagandist, the video clearly shows the equipment without Ukrainian identification marks in the form of white band. Those were not trophies, those were gifts from Russia. Regarding equipment, one important fact should be noted. The militants claimed that they allegedly just found these vehicles in one of the hangars of Luhansk, namely the PTS-2 tracked amphibious transporter, 34 units in working order. It doesn't work that way. The most likely version was this amphibious equipment was brought from Crimea. Anyway, the warfare continued. Trench 1 in the areas of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, Mobile 1 in the Luhansk Oblast, and cyber warfare in the sphere of information and propaganda. Taking losses from the accounts of Ukrainian aviation, the terrorists requested assistance in terms of air defense from Russia. The air defense units of Ukraine, located near the Donetsk airport, later known as the Zenith position, was in hot water. The 156th Donetsk Air Defense Missile Regiment was one of those few units which, despite its geographical position, had not fallen under the control of the militants. The regiment was armed with Buk, air defense systems capable of shooting down any aircraft at an altitude of up to 25 kilometers. The firing range of the old modifications is 30 kilometers. Despite the fact that all the battle-ready equipment of the regiment was deployed to an administrative border with Crimea as early as March, the militants did not lose interest in the unit. After having received at least one complex, even an ineffective one, the militants would be able to get the same from Russia following the established pattern, and the issue of air defense would be resolved. Not without problems, initially negotiating with the militants and then shooting in the air, the anti-aircraft gunners remained true to their oath and did not give up their positions or equipment. On June 18th, the UAF lost the T-64 tank in Stanitsa Luhanska. Encircled by the militants, the vehicle was knocked out of action. In order not to surrender to the enemy, the crew blew themselves up inside the vehicle with a grenade. On the same day in Donetsk, 2 Russian T-72 tanks were spotted for the first time. The tank fleet of Ukraine is based on T-64. These machines can be easily distinguished visually. The latter has small road wheels, while the T-72 and its modifications have large wheels. On June 19th, fierce battles took place near Krasny Liman and Yampil. Krasny Liman was liberated back on June 3rd, and the grounding of terrorists in Slavyansk was close to ending up without supplies. The militants, numbering about 1,000 people, depended on the supply of arms and ammunition from Russia. The bridges across the Siversky Donetsk River were an important element of this road of life. All the roads leading to these bridges converged near the town of Yampil. The importance of this ground was clear to both the leader of the militants, Girkin, and the Ukrainian command. Terrorists concentrated their most experienced and trained fighters in this zone. From the Ukrainian side, all possible measures were also taken. To ensure the success of the operation, assault troops received artillery support and a tank. However, despite the large number of involved forces and equipment, the battle was very difficult, since the entire battle took place on the forest road. Unable to advance to a broad front, the Ukrainian military suffered 16 fatalities. From the back of one wounded soldier, surgeons removed 4 9mm bullets of a special sniper cartridge SP5. This cartridge is used only in the special rifle VSS Vintorez. This rifle is issued to Russian special forces and is not available for sale on the open market. At the cost of many lives, Yampil was liberated. The supply of terrorists in Slavyansk had been depleted. However, it became obvious that fighting in restrained urban conditions is clearly the worst-case scenario for soldiers. It is not difficult to crush the terrorists located in cities if you are armed with cannon and rocket artillery. Such actions have already taken place in world history, and recently, in 1995, the Russian army was able to storm a large city despite the selfless efforts of its defenders, albeit at the cost of the lives of thousands of civilians and by the total destruction of buildings. Unlike the Russian Federation army in Chechnya, the Ukrainian army was on its territory. Each destroyed building will have to be rebuilt later. Every injured civilian is an injured citizen of Ukraine. Excessive destruction does not add popularity to the army, nor to the government, nor Ukraine as a whole. On the other hand, the Russian leadership was eagerly awaiting carpet bombings as an excuse for sending in so-called peacekeeping forces for peace enforcement and further occupation. The Ukrainian security forces really tried to restore order and restore the rule of law without shelling cities and villages into dust. That is why, in order to show his intentions to the population deceived by propaganda, President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko announced the first unilateral ceasefire on June 20, 2014.